Well, thank you, Shannon, for coming to talk with me today and sort of indirectly talking with our viewers and those who are interested in the centre. I'm talking with Dr. Shannon Murdoch, and I'm not going to be reading from notes during this interview, but I am going to have to read this bit. So Shannon is a member of the recently appointed Domestic Violence Prevention Council. Wonderful news, Shannon.
Yes.
And also a researcher with Griffith University, Violence Research and Prevention Program, and currently a leader in Mentors in Violence Prevention, an initiative that's being rolled out in Australia and the parts of the rest of the world. That's something that we'll go on to talk about a little bit more. So I thought what I thought was really interesting, Shannon, was what brought you into this work. You know, what was the pathway that led to your involvement?
Yeah, it was actually a very circuitous route. I initially went to work as an academic counselor at a university, and then as I was doing that, was having a lot of students who were coming to me with issues that reflected gender-based violence. So it kind of, started planted that little seed that, okay, there's something serious happening here, because my concern was the things that impacted students outside the classroom, but ultimately had an effect on their academic achievement. So this was one of those things, it kind of went into the bucket with a lot of other things. And just the more I paid attention, the more I saw how overwhelming it was, and particularly for my female students. So I just got interested, just kind of at that basic starting point. So I went back to get a PhD in university student development, because I thought, there was a lot more I could learn about young people's development at that age. And then very kind of serendipitously, I came in contact with the organization where MVP lives, and I went to work there. And in a different program, but as you start working, you have to go through an orientation of every program. So I was just, like a lot of people, sitting in the training, and for me the light bulb just went off. I mean, it was really kind of that moment of, oh, okay, this is what you can do if you're not directly involved in a situation. Because that was always my struggle was, okay, if I'm not the victim and I'm not the perpetrator, what's my role? And I think a lot of people have that question. So for me, it really answered that question and motivated me to do better. So I thought, okay, if I needed to hear that, so do other people. So that's why I've been doing it all this time.
Interesting. And in the United States, and perhaps in the university that you were in, I'm conscious that the federal government has introduced Article 9, which offers some protection.
Title 9, yes.
Title 9 to students on campuses. So was that in effect when you were having that experience with your students? And
it was, but at that time it was largely focused on equality in athletics. So it wasn't necessarily, the law has always been the same, but the way it was enacted was really focused on athletics and on athletic opportunities. So now, just in the last probably 2 or 3 years, since I've been gone from the States, it has been kind of dusted off and used in a lot of other ways that I think are really encouraging and are in the truer spirit of the initial law in the first place.
Yes. So tell me about the Mentors in Violence Prevention program itself, and where did it originate, and what was its intention when it was begun?
Sure. So MVP at its core is a leadership program. So it's a leadership program that's focused on education and prevention of gender-based violence, so primarily men's violence against women. And it was started in 1993 by a man named Jackson Katz, because he was going out as someone who was interested in these issues, but he didn't see a lot of other men participating as part of the solution. So the talk at that time for men was really risk reduction. Don't beat your wife, don't rape women, you're bound to be a perpetrator eventually, so here, we're gonna help you not to do that, was kind of what the conversation was. And he really thought that if he could reframe the way people had the conversation, it would actually empower men to engage in a proactive, positive solution, essentially. So it was really that. It was the idea that to engage men as part of the solution, we could get a lot further, because what we know to be true is that most men don't perpetrate violence. It's only some, but all those other men typically don't have a voice. They're not very vocal about what role they play, and they're not very vocal in challenging those other men. So that was really the idea, was that giving men permission to have a different conversation might allow them to really fully engage in the issue.
Yeah. So that aligns quite well with White Ribbon Day, doesn't it?
It does.
So the principles that lie behind White Ribbon. So when it was rolled out in the United States first, was it rolled out with men in the first instance?
It was. It was a men's program for 2 years. So what they did was they used university male athletes with the idea that they're role models. They're men that other men and boys would look up to. So they used these university male athletes to work with high school boys. So that's how the program ran for 2 years. And it was really successful. So they went, okay, if we have a social issue that we're trying to confront, we need to involve everyone in that conversation. So in 1995, they created a female component that mirrored the men's component. So it allowed for the expansion of the work to work with high school girls as well.
Right.
And then from there, it just expanded and expanded and expanded.
Right.
And then once we started working in professional sporting circles, that got people's attention.
Right.
So that's how we then went to work in the military. That's why now we work in business organizations, with social service providers, you name it, but always still with high school and university students and staff.
Right. Just coming back to the original conception of the program and its rollout and the alignment with White Ribbon, and that idea that that men can be active in violence prevention.
Well, they're necessary. I mean, even more than can be. They are critical.
So just thinking about that in terms of the original conception of the way that the program was delivered, and then the shift to delivering it with women, did the theoretical concepts underpinning it stay the same? So in terms of the delivery to the women's groups, and in terms of sort of gender analysis, the content and material pretty much stayed the same?
Always. I mean, it has always very much been the same, because it's always been, for us, it's always been a gendered conversation.
Yes.
You know, so recognizing that the perspective is different, but we actually need to be having the same conversation, if that makes any sense. Because for us, it's about empowered bystander behavior. So it's not men as perpetrators or potential perpetrators, and it's not women as victims or potential survivors. It's about the role we all have as third parties to address issues in our culture that are problematic, and then to address issues at the point in when and if we see them. So that conversation never changed. The conversation about gender and gender roles and inequality and harassment, all those things remain the same, and the methodology remain the same as well. It's just the difference of you're talking to men, so their perspective might be that little bit different. And you're talking to women, so their perspective will be that little bit different. But from behind, the methodology was exactly the same, and hasn't changed in all that time.
But maybe, I mean, I think one of the issues I wonder about is that given that the Australian nationwide data is telling us that 1 in 3 women have been victims of either sexual violence and or domestic violence, it can be assumed, therefore, that many of the women who may participate in an MVP program will have been victims at some point.
100%.
So I'm just wondering about how that might sit sometimes when you have participants who are, you know, so if you think of a continuum of awareness of these issues, some people may be sitting up here and others will be sitting somewhere, you know, down here. So, and how to manage that tension potentially between the needs and expectations of victim survivors versus those in the group who may be still operating at that very sort of gender biased position.
It's a couple different things, and it depends really on the group. So as an example, with young people, what we often do, when I say young people, I mean university and high school age students. What we often do is work in gender diverse groups, so single gendered groups. So, you know, you're already kind of taking away that, the idea that, particularly for young men, some of the beliefs that they hold can be very triggering and upsetting and confronting for young women, especially when you know a lot of them would be survivors. So, you know, you divide the group that way, and that creates safe space in a lot of different ways, not just because of that kind of gap in experience. And then within the groups, what we try to do, because it's a discussion-based model, is really let the group govern what the discussion looks like. So as an example, someone who's a victim survivor might say nothing, and they might just kind of sit and listen and engage in the process. But because the victim blaming isn't there, because all of the things that are particularly harmful for a woman who's come out on the other side of that, we're very conscious of not letting that stuff happen in a training. So I think it's actually a very protective space in a lot of ways, because the conversation isn't about you as a victim or you as a survivor. It's about, hey, we all have a role to play here. How do we do that well? How do we lift up and support these women who we know are going through these things? How do we stop them from happening? And for women who, to your point, may have very little information, may not have any interaction with it at all, what we often find is that through the conversation, not just that we're raising that awareness, but that their peers are actually, in most cases, very gently guiding them along as well. They'll tell their personal stories, they'll challenge behavior, typically in a very respectful way, so that your victim survivor and your person who has no knowledge of this whatsoever, what you can see over the course of training is them getting closer and closer to each other, if that makes sense, kind of the leveling of the playing field. And for us, as facilitators, that's our job. It's our job to make sure that that the things that could be triggering, confronting, particularly damaging for someone who's already been through such a traumatic experience don't happen. So we're very conscious of trying to maintain that safe space and using a number of tools to do that.
So with women who are thinking of participating in the program, they can have confidence that the methodology and the structure is such that that it allows them that a safe space to share their experience.
100%, or to not share.
Or to not, absolutely.
Whichever way they choose to engage in it is what we do, because for us it's really participant driven. So it's completely up to their level of comfort what they do or don't share, or how they do or don't participate. But it is very much an aside from the victim survivor experience, which we often find that they find empowering.
Yes. So in terms of it being a leadership program, tell me a little bit about that. What's your expectation once people have graduated and they receive a certificate? Is that
it depends on what they do. So if they go to a train the trainer, we certify that they have been there, because for us we're very conscious that sometimes a certificate, people feel like that conveys a sense of expertise. So we're very conscious that all we ever do is certify people's participation in the program, because for us the reality is we live in a culture that every single minute of the day tells us certain things and builds certain ideals, and that no day or 3 days is going to shift that 100%. Recognizing that people come in all different places. Some people come with a lot of information already, to your point. Some people come with none. So for us, it's about moving every person forward. So we don't necessarily feel like certificates are necessary in that sense, especially in the awareness raising context where you've only got an hour or two or maybe even a day. So we do provide certificates for the train the trainer, but for awareness raising we don't. But our expectation is that we've challenged people. Our expectation is that we have raised people's awareness and that we have inspired them to go out now and look at the world differently and to be prepared to step into the gap when they hear something that's not right, when they see something that's not right, when they have that inkling that something may be going on there. And the reality is, typically in those situations, we do nothing. Right? Our culture teaches us to do nothing. We get rewarded for doing nothing. So for us, that's where the leadership comes in. It's that challenge of doing the hard thing. Having the courage to say the thing that people aren't going to like. Having the courage to step out there when you maybe don't have 100% of the information. And being willing to sometimes be that man or woman on an island. You know, I mean, that idea that you're not always going to get the social reward for stepping up in these situations is not often high. So for us, that's where the leadership comes in. Leadership is that one person who's willing to do that hard thing and have the courage to persist at that, to bring other people along. And for us, the reality is this will not change without leadership. And for us, that's not about you know, power and oppression and like formal rank or hierarchical, I never can say that word, structure. It's about, as a person, what is my ability to role model for other people? What is my ability to say, you know what, that's not right and I'm going to do something? To us, that's leadership. And we spend a lot of time actually with the participants having them define leadership so that we're clear that it's about what they think. It's about what they're going to do. It's not about this is the definition of leadership from the dictionary. You know, it's about how do I personally feel that leadership works and how might I go out and do that in regards to these issues. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it sounds like quite an empowerment approach from that point of view. You know, with facilitating people being able to identify those things. I was interested too, whether do you hear back from your students? Do you get any feedback sometimes in terms of how it works? You know, how it's affected people.
Yeah, 100%. That's the best bit, I think. I mean, that's the bit that we really love is that, you know, as I said, it's no one day of training. It's how you can start planting that seed that they then go out and their life, you know, connects with it, and then they start using it. So we do a lot of that. We do, you know, kind of engagement surveys, you know, kind of right at the end of the training. But then we often follow up and do, you know, focus groups and those kinds of things, or our, the group we've worked with will do a focus group and ask people how they're going with it. So I've had some really interesting follow-ups in regards to that. You know, I was talking just recently with the high school that we had been at, and they said that they had a significant uptick in not the students necessarily doing things overt, but in the students reporting to their school nurse and to their school counselor. That, you know, the students who had come to training were now kind of going to the counselor and saying, okay, this thing is happening, how can I help, or can you talk to that student? You know, so, and they had seen a significant rise in that. So, you know, it's things like that, and we hear that a lot, you know, that people are going, oh, okay. You know, I think so many people at the end of the day really want to do something, and they're just disconnected from, they're either disempowered or they don't know what to do.
When I hear you say that some of the young people then avail themselves of the school nurse, does that mean that one of the effects of the course is to allow victims to feel able to come forward, to seek help for the issues that they may have been holding on to? Is it a kind of, does it have that effect as well?
Well, we don't specifically focus on victims.
No,
so,
I'm aware of that. But
so,
just in the raising of the issues, the awareness raising, the knowledge that you might introduce as part of the course, do you think that might have the effect of allowing
100%. I mean, I think it allows victims to come forward. We've even seen, you know, perpetrators, and I said that to say, you know, not necessarily kind of the things that would get you arrested, perpetrators, but, you know, people doing kind of those low-level abusive, you wouldn't say low-level, but you know what I mean, kind of those beginning abusive behaviors, like the controlling and those sorts of things, kind of go, oh, okay, you know what, I'm going to have to check that, and I'm going to seek help for that, and more importantly, we see lots of people walk away more empowered to reach out, and the people that I was talking about in that case were all bystanders. So they were not victims, they were bystanders who went on behalf of someone else. So that's more often than not the effect, is that the bystander then goes, oh, I've got a friend who, or hey, that person needs help, assistance, etc. So yes, in some cases, victims and perpetrators sit in training and go, oh, okay, I can go and do that. But more often than not, it's those bystanders who are now going, oh, okay, right, I actually have some skills, some tools to get help.
To know what to do.
Exactly.
So has the program been evaluated and in different settings? Because in listening to you, there's a range of programs. So,
yes,
yeah.
yes, we have. MVP has a pretty significant evidence base in the sense that we've done a 3-year longitudinal mixed methods study in high schools. That was done in the States. We've done a 2-year evaluation in the U.S. military as well. For us here, we've just got some longitudinal studies that are bubbling because the reality is those take time. So they're in the process as we speak. But we evaluate every single training just from a very basic kind of engagement standpoint. Then we often follow up with focus groups with whoever it was that brought us in to do the training. That's something that happens pretty consistently. And then we do some longitudinal stuff with pre-tests and post-tests and focus groups and then follow-ups, 6 months, 12 months, that sort of thing. So we've done a lot of that over the years. We've also done it with university students as well. We've also done it focused on how well we train trainers. So not just the impacts of the program, but our ability to effectively train other trainers as well. So there's been lots of different kinds of evaluation, as you can imagine, over the years. You have to do quite a bit of that. So.
At different levels. So in terms of Australia, and given the context with the Not Now, Not Ever task force report, and your appointment to the Violence Prevention or Implementation Council, and I guess we're not quite sure about the title there, but clearly it's got an emphasis on prevention. Have you got some thoughts then about violence prevention and in terms of its position within policy and the initiatives that are being mentioned by government as a priority in responding to the report? This
I think the report was a good start, right? I mean, I think for a lot of us, the things we saw, we went, yes, this should absolutely be here, so glad they're having this conversation. I think most people that I've interacted with, we all very much responded the same way, and I think the big question became, okay, now what?
Yes.
At least for me, that was the question. Now what? Now what will happen? I mean, the opportunities for change are vast. I mean, everything from the broad cultural change to the ways we can work with police and the schools and even the hospitals and other services to get this information out there. But ultimately, all that information is trying to do, in my opinion, is drive the cultural change, like drive that mass shift. So for me, I think the benefit and my hope in being on this council is to be able to actually hold people accountable to that, because I think that's what hasn't happened. Like, I think there's a lot more and more, especially in the last couple of years, there's a lot of interest, and I think it's politically, in some cases, politically expedient for people to be voicing a concern. But I think talk is cheap at the end of the day, from my perspective anyway. I think it's, okay, now what? What are we doing to actually make that thing you said a living and breathing change? And I think to me, that's the real challenge, and it's exciting to see that more and more money is available and more things are changing at the governmental and policy levels. That's not the focus of the work that I do. There would be other people who know much more and much more in depth about policy. But as someone who spends their time at the coalface for the most part, it's really important to have that buy-in at higher levels. So it's encouraging. At that point, my biggest hope is that it doesn't just become this thing that has a lot of potential.
Right.
That it becomes something that actually does something.
Yes, great. And it is called an implementation council, so
yes.
I guess that sort of reflects your passion or interest there. Just coming back to the course itself, and there's one question that I had too, in regard to members of a course that you may determine need more awareness and more knowledge, and perhaps don't pass the, and I'm assuming that there's kind of like a pass estimation about how the students in a group have engaged with the material, and understood and analysed it. For those who you have concerns about and who may clearly struggle with the material, what happens for them?
It can be a few different things. The only place where there is a pass-fail is at the train-the-trainer level.
Right.
So at the awareness-raising level, we are doing just that.
Yes.
We are raising awareness and understanding that people come to that from all different places, and that our goal is just to move them forward, to challenge their thinking and get them to think about some different things. You know, one of the things we often say is you don't have to buy it, just rent it for a little while. You know, that sense of, that's what awareness raising, in our opinion, does. So from the awareness raising standpoint, there is no pass-fail kind of circumstance. From a train-the-trainer standpoint, there is. Having said that, we really strongly feel that a person actually doesn't have to be an expert. They don't have to have all of the subject matter knowledge that you or I might have, as an example. There's people who've done this and are really immersed in it all of the time. What they have to be able to do is they have to be able to get on board with the idea that men's violence against women is an issue that is underpinned by any number of other cultural issues, and they have to be willing to engage people in that conversation. So for us, it's really about, are people, A, on board with the ideals and the philosophy of the program, and B, do they have enough to be able to guide those conversations? When we are uncertain or unsure about that, we do a couple of things. First, we try to figure out what other supports that person might have, because for us, sometimes the value of having a particular person delivering that information is very, very important. And if we can prop them up with support from another coworker or another colleague, then it still becomes a valuable thing for them to be doing. And understanding that they learn while they do it. You know, that can sometimes be a part of it. So that's always kind of our first question is, I mean, assuming they meet the baseline benchmarks is okay. So, you know, person X maybe is a little bit shy, a little bit quiet, doesn't have a lot to say, but their value as a facilitator is really high. So does another person from their organization present that balance? In other cases, if we feel like a person is just not on board, we essentially counsel them out of the program. I mean, it's pretty much that simple. We just say, you know, look, perhaps you have more that you need to learn or explore before you're suitable to be delivering this curriculum, and that we would encourage you to engage in more awareness raising, to participate in some of the sessions that will be run by this other person in your organization, but we cannot certify you at this time. And we'd love to see you back. So I mean, we try to make it still a process that we feel like there's still value of them having been in a 3-day training, even if they're not suitable as trainers. But we are very conscious of who goes forward, but the reality being they don't have to be the best trainer ever in order to meet that benchmark. For us, the benchmark is, can this person engage in conversations about this material? Full stop. Because as a community development model, you have to understand that development is part of that, and that means that sometimes your trainers are developing as well. Everyone doesn't come to the table ideally. There are some who you go, oh yeah, this person's going to be really great, and there are others you think, okay, this person's going to need some support, but if they've got that in their organization, for us, that's okay. So others would disagree. Other people do it other ways, but for us, as a community development model, you have to understand that people come with varying levels of information, and the opportunity for them to facilitate can be really important for the community. So it's a tough call, but
yes, but probably an important one. I guess in relation to that, there seems to be quite a bit happening in the education space in domestic and family violence, and so perhaps there's going to be hopefully more choice for people who you recommend need to get some more awareness raising and knowledge perhaps before. Are they able to come back in and do the training again at some point?
Yeah, they could do. I mean, there's no restriction from our perspective.
Right.
The restriction probably is more generally that organizations don't always come back for a second round of training. And by organizations, I mean a group like yours that has organized this opportunity. If you don't organize another opportunity, then that person may not be able to circle back through. So that's probably the barrier there in that sense. But from our perspective, we would not stop someone from coming through. It has been pretty rare that we have had to not certify people in a way that has been contentious, in a way that they would not be welcomed back. Of course that happens. I mean, you know, over hundreds of people, you're going to have that one or two who you think, no, you're not going to be suitable ever. But that's pretty rare.
It is that kind of work, isn't it, where these attitudes get fundamentally challenged, don't they? So in terms of the methodology and the sort of ideal methodology with the program, is it part of the package, so to speak, to come back to a group that you've trained at some point for a refresher or touching base with them in terms of how the material has been implemented in practice, or what impact it's had on their practice?
Definitely, and that tends to happen more with groups that are active. The reality of the train the trainer is that ultimately the only thing that is in my control is the initial training. So unfortunately, what happens is sometimes groups come to training and then go out and don't do anything. When groups go out and are very active, it gives me the opportunity to stay in contact. It gives me the opportunity to circle back. As an example, something I've done in Tasmania and in Victoria as well is circled back to a group a year later and brought everyone together for like a few hours, you know, kind of a morning, and been able to talk about, you know, what are you doing, what are the challenges, what's really working for you, how's it being received, you know, all those kinds of things. Because oftentimes groups are very loosely connected. You know, it's never 25 people from the same organization. You know, it's 3 people from here, 3 people from there. So they all kind of go off in their different directions and do different things at the end of the day. So it's been really, really great and really, really helpful to be able to kind of bring people back together in order to have that conversation with each other. And something I'm planning for as well is to bring as many of the kind of active groups and people together for exactly what you're saying, kind of a refresher, and so that they can all kind of meet and know one another as well. But those are the kinds of things that take time to build. We really have only been on the ground here a short time.
Right. Oh, in Australia?
Well, I mean, you know, 5 years being a relatively short time.
Yes,
and then I didn't come and immediately deliver training. I mean, it took me a year and a half or so to kind of get that going. So it's only been going now probably 3.5 years in Australia. So those things need time to build.
Yes. So, and I was going to come to that, you know, in terms of perhaps finishing up in talking with you about what your hopes and dreams are for MVP, and particularly in the Australian context. Where do you see it going?
I would really love to put myself out of work. I mean, that's really what I would love to have happen. For us, you know, it's not about a business model. I mean, for lack of a better way to say that, like I don't see myself as building a business that's going to be here 20 years from now. I really, really sincerely hope that it's not. So for me, it's not so much about long-term planning, if that makes any sense. Like, I still hold on to the hope that we're going to get to a place where we don't need this kind of training, where people don't need training on how to challenge one another, how to step up to that hard space. So my goal is to put myself out of business. Having said that, in the interim, what I really hope to see happen is to see more and more communities take this opportunity forward, because I think it is an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to empower people, to answer some of those fears, to give people support and permission, and to help them build their confidence to address these things. So for me, it is really, at its very core, that is what I want to see this program doing. And I think it's about making sure that everyone has access. I mean, that's the reason why when Colleen called me about this, I was so excited to take this opportunity up, because that's the thing that I think gives me the most heartburn, is that I think this information is so important. I think this tool is important. It's not the only answer, but I think it's certainly a part of the solution. And I really hate to feel like it is inaccessible to people. So for me, it's about making sure that everyone that can and is interested to engage in this has access to it, and spreading the word as widely as possible. It's one reason why we do why we work with so many different populations, because we feel like this is a conversation for everyone. So for me, I think the hardest thing is staying true to those values. I think that's what's hard, is that when there's so much coming at you and there's so many distractions to pull you off task. For me, the hard part is staying true to why I came here in the first place, and why I have been with MVP now all this time, is to get people to have this conversation. And so for me, that is the goal, plain and simple.
At the White Ribbon morning tea that I attended with some colleagues yesterday, the issue of sport in Australia and some of the attitudes that that come across in the media and so forth was raised as a challenge in terms of what's something that White Ribbon would want to be involved with and concerned about. Have you moved into working with any of the sporting organisations in Queensland?
It's interesting, only just starting to. I think it's one of those things that, like a lot of those kinds of organizations, they have those things they've always done, and they just keep going back to the well on those things. And I think a lot of organizations, not just sporting organizations, tick the box. I think that's the reality of it. They go, yeah, we do that. Yeah, domestic violence, tick. And I think it can be really hard to shake people out of that to some extent. So like everything else, I have found that opportunity is growing and growing. I've had some conversations. What will come of that? Who knows? But I think it's certainly an opportunity. And for us, as always, we don't see sport as an opportunity because it's a problem. We see it as an opportunity because those people are leaders. They're people that we look up to in our culture, rightly or wrongly. Athletes are put in that place. So if we can teach them to be better models for others, then we could be going a long way. So for me, it's not about sports or a problem. It's about, wow, what an opportunity we have to engage people who other people are watching, other people are looking up to. That's why MVP started with athletes, not because athletes are trouble, but because athletes are leaders. They are mentors to people. And if we can have them sending the right messages, how amazing would that be?
Powerful. So have you been involved with White Ribbon at all? Have they?
No, not really. No.
And in terms of government funding, is there any investment in? So it's entirely dependent at the moment on organisations being able to access the training and to pay, to cover the costs of the training.
Absolutely, 100%. For us, we've never had access to government funding.
No.
It's a very interesting pool, as you would know yourself. That there tend to be the things that, like everything else, the things that they always do and always fund, and aren't necessarily looking for something that seems new. And so that's fine. I mean, that doesn't really phase us one way or the other. We're still going to do our work. So. It is what it is.
But it sounds like you're offering a very effective, sort of on the ground prevention initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, for us, change happens on the ground. At the end of the day, it happens when every individual feels, I've got to do something here, and feels like they have the tools to do it.
Great. Well, thank you, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
Very much. It's been very interesting.
Thank you.